Welcome to Agile Coaches Corner by AgileThought, the podcast for practitioners and leaders seeking advice to refine the way they work and pave the path to better outcomes. Now, here's your host, coach, and Agile expert, Dan Neumann.
Welcome to this episode of the Agile Coaches Corner. I'm your host, Dan Neumann, and today I'm joined by a colleague here in the transformation practice, Christy Erbeck. And of course, what you're going to hear are Christy's and mine opinions, not necessarily those of AgileThought, other companies, or other people. And I'm excited that today we're going to be talking about the topic of feedback.
Hi, Dan. Glad to be here. This is going to be an interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
So why is feedback of particular interest to you right now?
Well, it's of particular interest right now because I actually have to go back to August 2018 when we were out at Agile 2018 in San Diego, and the closing keynote address was given by Kim Scott, who wrote the book Radical Candor. And I loved her keynote and thought it was really impactful and insightful. And so I picked up her book, and I had not read it. So almost 9 months later, I've not yet read the book, but we started going through the Eckerd leadership program for AgileThought. And one of the first things that they had us do was learn the SBI model, which stands for Situation, Behavior, Impact. And so we were talked to, we were shared, we were given examples, and we were asked and encouraged to practice this model with our colleagues, with our clients. And so the whole topic of feedback has been on my mind, and Radical Candor is on my book list. It was number 4 on my list to read this year in 2019. And so I've just cracked it open, and I feel like it's really timely because shortly after that class, for the Situation Behavior Impact class, my Harvard Business Review magazine showed up at my doorstep, and the cover is all about the feedback fallacy. So I feel like I'm studying that topic right now.
Yeah, you've had a bunch of these things kind of come together somewhat serendipitously to create that interest. And as Agile coaches, we find ourselves often in a situation where we're expected to give feedback. If we're training somebody on Scrum or coaching somebody on Scrum after they've got some of the basic mechanics down, there's feedback on the effectiveness of the Scrum events. There's coaching around how conflict is managed or the ways different interactions are handled with the team. So feedback and doing it effectively is a big part of often what we're asked to do.
Absolutely. And the way in which we give feedback, as well as the way in which we receive feedback, is critically important. We have to understand the nuances of feedback and when is the right time to provide that. How do we set the stage so that the person that we are going to give feedback to can hear it and can receive it, process it, etc. So it takes a tremendous amount of insight and awareness to both give and receive feedback in a positive way.
Yeah, and in a positive way comes to mind, especially with feedback. And I somewhat jokingly, and I think somewhat with a grain of truth, allude to the strong German heritage in my background. And I feel like I'm much better at giving, quote, feedback on things that maybe are areas for development. And that's not, I would say not always, maybe not often the best way to actually coach somebody through or to foster new behaviors or reinforce positive behaviors. That's certainly a growth opportunity for me, and one that I've, like you mentioned, been intentionally practicing as trying to not just give, quote, feedback when it's something that should be done differently or I think should be done differently. And maybe we can explore that a little bit, because the feedback fallacy talks a lot about what we often think of as feedback. We, people who are in management, we people who think we're good at something, give that, feedback. So
absolutely. I've always been told that I give great feedback and that I have such insight into how people think and what they might be going through. And yet when I read the feedback fallacy, which was written by Marcus Buckingham and Amy Goodall, the three fallacies they talk about is the source of truth, learning, and excellence. And these are really very self-centered ways in which we give feedback. And, for example, I might say something about what I observed of behavior you doing, and for whatever reason, that is not at all what you intended, but because I think I know better than you, or I think that I am maybe more seasoned in something than you are, I'm going to share my perspective. And that may not at all be the truth in any way, shape, or form. And so the fact that I think I know you better than you know yourself is a fallacy. And it also takes away your ability to, your empowerment in a way, if I'm telling you something, right? So what I liked about the situation behavior impact, or the SBI model, is that the only thing that I'm sharing with you that's my opinion is the impact that your behavior in a particular situation had on me. And so then, yes, that's true. Everything else, if I were to give you feedback, may not, and most likely would not be true. Does that make sense?
What I heard you saying is, when we're giving that feedback, especially when there is no one right way to do it, referring to not ourselves as the expert, but referring to the impact it had on us. So what I want to give one example they use is about the airplane checklist, or the right way for a nurse to draw blood. Like there is a right way to do that. In that case, there is a source of truth, and feedback on incorrect things that could lead to dangerous situations is completely valid. Mm-hmm. It gets much less I'm the source of truth when it gets into things like the way somebody facilitated, or the way somebody did a training, or the way they phrased a particular thing, or the why of a particular behavior. And that's where the situation behavior impact, or SBI, that you were referencing comes in. So here's the situation, here's the behavior I saw, and here's the emotional impact it had on me. And now we have an opportunity to explore. It isn't, gee, I didn't like the way you did that, here's the way to do that better.
Mm-hmm. Right, definitely. The other thing that I liked about the feedback fallacy was that when we are talking to people or giving feedback on something that somebody may not be really good at, we're actually creating a sense of fight or flight in them, and they can't hear it. So this is one of the reasons why when people give us feedback that is perceived as critical or negative, we maybe shut down, can't hear it as well, is because we have literally gone into that mode of survival. And yet when we can give feedback on something that is in our giftings, they talk about we learn the most in our comfort zones. We're most open to possibility, most creative, insightful, and productive in those areas that we have a natural gifting or tendency to work in. So just the space and the physiological reaction that we have when we're receiving feedback is important to consider. And I should correct myself. I said Amy Goodall, and it's actually Ashley Goodall she's a Cisco senior VP.
So I wasn't sure if I should give you that feedback or not.
Well, I definitely want to make sure I'm properly attributing who wrote, because it's a wonderful, wonderful article.
Totally understand.
Yep.
And I'm going to have to look for other writings by these folks too, because this article is fantastic. So, Christy, what you were mentioning with the fight or flight in receiving feedback reminds me of the book Crucial Conversations. And in there, a crucial conversation is defined as one in which opinions differ, stakes are high, and it's an emotional topic, or for some reason it's emotionally charged. And in that, once we have that trigger, we can tell ourselves a story, and unconsciously often we tell ourselves a story, and that feeds our reaction to it, which can be this fight or flight reaction where we just kind of get immediately stupid because of all the chemicals that are released in our brain when we feel threatened and when we feel attacked. And so creating some safety to talk about the impact or make explicit the story that we're telling ourselves, and then ask for validation. Hey, when that happened, here's the story I told myself about that. Mm-hmm. Am I correct? And really offering that up so that we can more intelligently think about it than fight or flight.
Right. Absolutely. And if we think through the language of the story I'm telling myself or the story I'm making up is something that Brene Brown talks about in her book, Dare to Lead, and in her Netflix special, The Call to Courage, because this is something that we do. We make these stories up in our heads, and until we're able to confirm or reconcile the story that we're making up with the behavior or the reaction that the other person is having towards us, we can really go off track really quickly and go down a path that we don't want to, don't need to, etc. And in her book, Dare to Lead, she tells the story of she and her husband taking an early morning swim in a lake, and she's trying to connect with her husband, and she feels like he's blowing her off. And, she basically says before they get out of the water, Steve, the story I'm making up is this, and, help me understand where you're coming from. And just using that framework of, this is what I'm telling myself. How is that really what you intend? Of course, it's not what he intended. He was not trying to blow her off, but he had something else going on in his head that was causing him to react in a certain way. And as husband and wife, if you've been married for any amount of time, you know what it's like to have a story in your head and it not be confirmed or reconciled in a short amount of time, and then lots of things happen that have unintended consequences. And to your point about safety, an SBI model can really create a safe framework and space for us to show up fully as humans, as well as to have those difficult conversations that are appropriate for the workplace. So what I love about the second fallacy, the source of truth, is that we see this showing up on teams who try to size or estimate their work. We know how horrible humans are at estimation. Like, we just don't have the capacity to do that accurately. And so we are, like they say, the first problem with feedback is that humans are unreliable raters of other humans. We just don't have the capacity to do that well. We think we do. And this is where our egos get in the way often, is that we think we can rate someone very well, but in truth, we don't have the whole picture of them, and we are looking at them from one viewpoint, and we can see something really just from one viewpoint versus having an objective way of rating or evaluating or estimating how well or not well they do something.
Have a topic you want us to tackle? Send an email to podcast@agilethought.com or tweet it with the hashtag AgileThoughtPodcast.
So, Christy, we've talked about kind of the how we learn and the importance of creating psychological safety and giving feedback in a way that we're not well, we're minimizing the potential that somebody's going to have a fight or flight reaction to. That's always possible. You can't control somebody's reaction to thing, but there are ways to go about that. The SBI framework is one of those, making the story we tell ourselves explicit and asking if that's the right story or not, trying to get some validation. Mm-hmm. And then we touched briefly at the beginning, kind of ourselves as the source of truth as one of those challenges with providing feedback to. In some situations, like the airline pilot, the nurse, yep, maybe there is a right way to do it. In a lot of situations, there aren't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's such a nuanced variety of ways, especially in the Agile coaching world, or even in the world where we're having to give team members feedback on their behavior, how they are showing up on the team. And yeah, there is no one right way to do that. All we can talk about is the impact that it had on us, right?
Right, and with working with people over time, you end up with it was mentioned in the episode I did with Esther Derby. You end up with this confirmation bias. So once you have a framework in mind for how you believe somebody is good at this or bad at this or doesn't follow through on things. Let's say we have somebody who doesn't follow through, or that's my impression. Well, then we have this confirmation bias, and we'll start noticing more when they don't follow through. It might not be a significant percentage, but those opportunities where we see something that confirms our existing belief are more sticky than those instances that would refute our belief. And so, I'd encourage folks to listen to the episode with Esther Derby, where we talk about managers' role in agility and this feedback thing. We are poor raters of other people's behavior, of their output.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so the article actually talks about, instead of looking always at outputs, look at what are the outcomes you're getting from the folks, and how can you create situations that will allow for more consistent levels of excellence or the type of outcome that you are looking for. Look at the environment, look at the system. How is that system and that environment supporting these people in doing and creating the outcomes that you are searching for and that you need?
Yeah, both in the source of truth as well as in kind of helping people excel. There's a concept of being really specific, not being vague or general about, hey, you did a great job with that, but here are some things I noticed, maybe really specifically, or here's the reaction I had to that specific item. And I think HR and annual reviews and that whole process, there was another article that I came across recently, are really looking at the biases, both gender biases and ethnic biases, and the way we recall what's happened, or let's say over the course of the year, and asking, how did this person do, is opening that for much more bias than if we put a much more concrete framework in place for providing that feedback. Because we are poor raters of other people's behavior.
Absolutely. And if you look at how most companies do annual performance reviews, when it comes time to conduct those annual performance reviews, often managers can only remember the last 30 days. And if they have not interacted, documented, provided immediate feedback along the way, as an employee, my evaluation may only take into consideration the last 30 days because, one, that's probably all they can consume as managers. They can't hold any more information if they haven't documented it along the way. And then there's a perception. So if the last interaction I had with my manager was less than stellar, they will be biased because that's human nature. You
have the ease of recalling things that have happened recently, which is something we're pretty good at. And then the other recall bias is where things have been particularly emotionally impactful, which serves served caveman, great, right? If you ate something that made you sick, or you had an animal that tried to kill you, remembering that and turning that into a new behavior is really valuable. But having somebody who steps in it once over the course of a year be burned into your memory and offsetting so many other good things is not helpful if we're trying to get a well-rounded perspective of somebody's performance. So.
And then finally, one thing that I'd like to point out about feedback is the sooner you can provide that feedback, and they called it a high priority interrupt, the better. And you did a great job actually today in providing one of our clients some immediate high priority interrupt feedback by telling him what you liked about how he supported you in the daily Scrum, how he supported the Scrum framework and the events and the purpose of the daily Scrum. And this is really important. It's the most and the best use of your time to interrupt so that he knows that this is positive behavior. Too often we're quick to interrupt the negative behavior and we let the positive behavior go by. Well, we want to reinforce the good things because that's what we want our focus on, and we want to redirect to that level of acuity and business acumen. Great job in doing that today with our client.
Well, that made me feel good. So, yeah, and it's like it says, it's a growth opportunity for me. That's certainly not. Gosh, I don't know. Maybe child rearing was different back when I was being reared, because boy, it seemed like the corrective feedback of chew with your mouth shut and enunciate clearly and you name it. By golly, if you weren't doing it right, you heard about it in my family. So, and
that was okay, very standard. And it doesn't mean that we don't want to correct and redirect behavior. But again, to the article's point about we respond better and more thoroughly when we are in our comfort zone than we do when we are in our fight or flight zone. It makes so much sense to insert those positive reinforcements and those positive opportunities for feedback, specifically around behavior.
And related to that, I'm looking forward to one of the upcoming podcasts is going to be with another person from Eckerd College with Joe Corella, who, in addition to doing some of the training for Eckerd, is a psychologist. He works with sports folks. And I'm looking forward to his feedback, his interpretation of things like sports coaches. I'm a Michigan State guy, and Tom Izzo in the basketball tournament made a lot of news headlines with basically ripping one of the freshmen pretty hard when he came off the court. And I think it's interesting to explore, and in this case with a guy who's got a psychology degree and practices in psychology, that type of feedback versus how we often hear Agile coaching community in talking about coaching, and they're very different animals. And also then, like, where's the line between somewhat kind of abusive behavior and, is it the tough love thing or what's going on there? So I'm looking forward to exploring that with Joe Corella from Eckerd College.
And that'll be great. And I would love to hear his thoughts on that, because I think there's a delicate balancing act between never giving someone feedback that talks about the negative impact that behavior had on me, because we also don't want everybody to get a trophy just for showing up, right? That is, there's a huge disincentive in that type of feedback where everybody's the same. Everybody is not the same, and we want to be able to help individuals improve in how they collaborate, communicate, and show up as wholehearted human beings in the workplace. Because when we have that, then we are much closer to the innovation and creativity and change that our world needs today without it.
And high-performing teams need a bunch of different people. What's the phrase?
Yes.
If we're the same, one of us is expendable, that type of that type of
Right.
thing. So, yeah, how do you leverage the strengths? How do you provide feedback without trying to turn it into cookie cutter?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that comes to mind for you on the topic of feedback?
I would say the topic that comes to mind is the context and way in which feedback is provided. I know 360 performance feedback is really popular right now and has been for a long time. I have been the recipient of 360-degree feedback that has been really powerful and empowering. I've also been the recipient of 360-degree feedback that is crushing and eviscerating. And not only does language matter, it really matters how one gives that type of feedback so that we can take it in and constructively grow and enhance ourselves and our skills versus the opposite. Mm-hmm. It's painful to receive 360-degree feedback that's unfiltered. And while people might say, well, I'm just being direct, actually you're being harmful and destructive and hurtful intentionally, and you're using a tool to get away with it. That's not okay.
Yeah, and direct is good, but direct doesn't mean tactless. And I think sometimes those, well, I'm just telling you like it is. Well,
right, exactly.
But you don't have to be a jerk about it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's why I'm curious. I know there's the book Radical Candor, and there's some other notions like that. I know I saw some topics at the Agile conference last year. I didn't end up attending those, but I'm curious. That'll be part of my continuous learning journey, I think, is really exploring continuing to explore the feedback topic. And related to that, one thing that I know I'm finding helpful as I'm practicing feedback and as you're practicing feedback we're doing some debriefing on that. So using some of the feedback either together with a third party or to each other, and then kind of reflecting back on how did that feel, to what would be some improvements on the feedback. So feedback on the feedback. And I'm finding that to be particularly helpful. And if folks are trying to improve their feedback and they have a partner who can help them along that journey or develop together with them, I think I'd encourage that. I'm finding that to be a particularly valuable activity myself. Definitely.
And I don't want to misrepresent the book Radical Candor. I have not read it yet. So I'm not sure that that's what she's talking about as being overly direct. What I remember about her keynote that impressed me and what made me pause was she told a story about someone she ended up having to fire, and he sat there saying, "Why didn't you tell me before?" And so I think there's this balance of being honest with somebody in an empathic way. And it was really, she, if I remember correctly, she was afraid to confront and have the difficult conversation with this person. And in the end, she hurt not only herself, but also the person she ended up having to fire and the overall team dynamic. And so to me, radical candor means almost radical candor with yourself. To what extent are you willing to have an honest conversation with yourself about how this person is impacting you or impacting me? And once I have that conversation, now can I prepare and do I have the tools and the techniques at my disposal to go have that radical conversation, candid conversation with this person to help, not to hurt?
Okay, yeah, I would assume that the author was not interested in hurting or advocating for that. I feel like there's a risk that people take something like that, much like Agile, right? Well, we're Agile. We don't need to document anything. Well, that's bull. I mean,
yeah.
And in fact, talking to some of the folks who are the signers of the Agile Manifesto, some of those guys are really detailed, highly technical. They're not just like yippee-ki-yay, we're going to go code some stuff. They're pretty disciplined folks. And so for this misinterpretation of, well, we value, working software over comprehensive documentation to all of a sudden become, well, we don't document, that's extremely unfortunate. And I guess I'm worried about the, short attention span theater saying, oh, we should be radically, providing radical feedback and doing it in a horribly destructive way. So I'll look forward to that. Unfortunately, my reading list is longer than my attention span for consuming long format. So I don't know when I will get to that, but I'll look forward to that. I will probably have the follow through to watch Brene Brown's Netflix special. You mentioned that. So it's fabulous. I can probably take the time to do that. And then what else is inspiring you, whether you're reading it or watching it? What's inspiring Christy these days?
Well, I'm still coming off the high of becoming a certified Dare to Lead facilitator, and all that goes along with that. It's fabulous, and I'm looking forward to our next podcast, which will talk about Dare to Lead, and I'm really excited about that. So right now, that's really inspiring, and I don't know.
It sounds
keeping me going.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it was a pretty powerful experience to go through the program. Lots of value there, and now there's of course the show to go with it that other people can consume if they have their Netflix membership, of course. And we'll explore that as part of our next time together here, which I think is going to be before too long.
Sounds good.
All right. And if people have topics they want, they can give us feedback. And they could email podcast@agilethought.com, or they can tweet it to us with the hashtag AgileThoughtPodcast. And we'll welcome that feedback, whether it's an SBI form or not. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
This has been the Agile Coaches Corner podcast, brought to you by AgileThought. Get the show notes and other helpful tips from this episode and other episodes at agilethought.com/podcast.